The movie opens with a college student named Holly King filming an introduction for a documentary that she and her friends were making for their psychology degree. She begins by saying that they have been intrigued by the Dyatlov Pass incident and wanted to investigate further into it, which is why she gathered a team to make it to the Ural mountain range where the incident had taken place. The team consisted of her as the lead researcher, followed by Jensen, a film student, Denise, an audio engineer, and two guides, Andy and JP, and after months of practice in the local mountains, the group makes their way to Russia. The scene then changes to a news report claiming that a search has begun for the 5 missing college students. Conspiracy theorists had managed to get access to a video that Holly and Jensen had made while trapped in what looks like a cave. Before the group had gone missing, they had reached Russia, where they headed to meet Peter Karev, the 10th member of the Dyatlov Pass hiking group. Peter was the only surviving member of the group because he had decided to stay back due to an illness. Soon after, he'd suffered from a mental breakdown and had been living in a psychiatric hospital. Just as the group reaches the psychiatric hospital to interview him, they were sent away by the staff, who told them that Peter had died. However, just before the group leaves, they notice an old man holding up a sign for them on the 2nd floor, but since the sign was in Russian, they couldn't understand what it says, and when Holly told him that, he was taken away before he can give her a reply. Later that night, Holly says into the camera that she thinks that the old man is Peter, and then they head to a local bar where the bartender offered them the same drink that the Dyatlov group had just before they embarked on their journey. At the bar, the group meets a man named Sergey who offers them a ride to the town where they were to begin their hiking journey. As they get off near the Mountain of the Dead, Sergey informed them that his aunt was one of the first responders who arrived on the scene. He asks Holly if they would be interested in talking to her, and when she tells him that they are, he agrees to take them to her. Before they visit his aunt, Alia, she asks Sergey to translate the sign that the old man had been holding up, and Sergey tells her that the sign says to stay away. The group then enters Alia's house, and she reveals that she had been on the scene with her brother, and they'd uncovered a trail of bodies and a machine nearby. However, instead of 9 bodies, they had actually found 11. Holly's shocked to hear this and informs the old woman that the official reports had claimed that there were only 9 bodies. But she tells Holly not to believe the report since they skipped out on a lot of important details. Not long after the interview, the group decides to continue with the incursion and eventually makes it to the base of the Ural mountain range. This is where JP unpacks the food while everyone else relaxes and jokes around. That night, while everyone was busy watching the northern lights, Holly notices Jensen looking in the opposite direction. When she asks him what he's looking for, he tells her right before the 9 hikers died, they'd reported seeing a strange orange light near the pass. However, since Jensen is known to be a conspiracy theorist, Holly doesn't really pay much attention to what he was saying. Then, everyone go to their tents to get some sleep, since they were gonna wake up early to go hiking the next morning. In the morning, Holly is woken up by Jensen, who tells her to come outside. As she and the others join Jensen outside their tents, he shows them a trail of footprints in the snow near their campsite. He points out that the footprints indicate that whoever was outside their campsite was barefoot, and it was impossible for anyone to walk around barefoot in the snow due to the freezing temperatures. He speculates that the footprints belong to a Yeti, but everyone just brushes off his theory. At this moment, Denise expresses her doubts about continuing with the journey and reminds the group that they can still turn back. Meanwhile, Andy accuses Holly and Jensen of trying to scare everyone by pranking them since they were the last ones to go back into their tent. Despite Holly telling him that it was not a prank, Andy is not convinced and tensions begin to rise between them. The group decides to continue with the hike and begin walking, but all of a sudden, they hear a strange sound that starts to freak everybody when they were unable to find an explanation for it. At the same time, the group discovers more footprints that lead to a weather tower, and curious, Holly climbs up the weather tower to check if the sound was coming from inside it. Just as she opens the door, she gets the shock of a lifetime when she notices a severed tongue inside. Anxious, the group begins to question whether they should continue with the hike and continue their investigation into the deaths, and Denise once again tries to warn the group and tells them that the tongue is just another sign telling them that they need to head back. Holly tries convincing her that it might not be anything, and as everyone tries to cool off after the shocking discovery, Holly approaches Jensen, who had been sitting alone, and asks him what's wrong. He reveals that a few years back he had a mental breakdown after he had heard the same strange sound. Holly tries to make him feel better about it and claims that she used to get night terrors about the Ural Mountains, but it was nothing other than a coincidence. Despite the setbacks, the group continues to move toward the Dyatlov Pass, and after a few hours of walking, Holly recognizes the area and immediately tells everyone that they've reached the pass. Everyone was surprised because according to the GPS, they were not supposed to reach there until a few more hours of hiking. Holly brushes off everybody's concern and tells them that they must have lost track of time, and she then spray paints all the places where the 9 bodies were found and begins narrating how each hiker died while Jensen films her. Once she was done, Andy approaches her and asks her if she'd messed with the GPS as a prank as well, but before she can defend herself, JP comes to her rescue and tells Andy that his compass is not working as well, which means that it's not really Holly's fault. When he hears this, Andy starts to freak out and once again tries to convince everyone that they should leave before they get lost in the mountains without their equipment. As Denise backs up, Holly is left with no choice, and she tells everyone that they should at least spend the night since they made it to the pass. Although both Andy and Denise were hesitant to stay overnight, they agree when Holly tells them that they'll leave the next morning. At night, once everyone goes back to their camps, Holly and Jensen decide to conduct a small investigation of their own. They take a small device and test radiation levels in the surrounding areas, and they come across a door where the radiation levels were much higher, and Holly wanted to investigate further. She tries to open it, but Jensen manages to convince her that they should come back in the morning with the rest of their friends. Early the next morning, Denise and Andy, who were sleeping in the same tent, are woken up by a strange sound. Andy tells Denise to stay inside while he goes to check it out, and as soon as he goes out, he immediately notices the sound of an avalanche headed their way. He begins shouting at everyone to alert them, and everyone packs up as many things that they can and rushes to find shelter from the avalanche. While trying to get away, Denise trips and gets caught in the snow, and before Andy can rescue her, she gets buried under the avalanche and gets killed. Everyone else gets further away, but they're still caught by the avalanche, and sometime later, one by one, everyone begins to emerge from the snow and find that Andy is injured and Denise is dead. With tensions running high, an argument breaks out between JP and Jensen. JP had asked Jensen to fire the flare gun so that someone could come and help them. However, Jensen was insisting that the Russian military was after them and was trying to assassinate all of them. JP finds the idea ridiculous, but when he notices Jensen and Holly sharing a look, he questions them about it. Holly ends up confessing that they came across a bunker and that they think that the Russian military is hiding something under it. The fact that Holly and Jensen had kept this to themselves does not really sit well with JP, but not wanting to create another argument, he tells them that they need to fire the gun before they get killed as well. Jensen then fires the gun and is surprised to find that the flare is orange, and he informs Holly that the orange light that the hikers had reported seeing was actually a flare signal. Just as things start to settle down, the group suddenly notices 2 men in the distance, and Holly starts waving at them and tells them that they need help. They shout back that they'd seen the flares and had come to help. Before the men can reach them though, Andy tells JP and Holly that the men were not carrying backpacks and that they could not have made it to them this quickly. Jensen realizes that the men are following them and tells everyone to run to the bunker. Holly and JP try to drag Andy, but he tells them to leave him behind since he will slow them down. They hand him the flare gun as the men get closer and run toward the bunker. As they open the door, one of the men shoots Andy in the head and kills him, and they manage to shoot JP in the shoulder as the 3 remaining friends enter the bunker. Jensen turns on night vision in his camera to get a better look inside the dark bunker, and he spots a switch and turns it on, causing lights to flood the bunker. The 3 of them notice 2 different pathways and decide to follow one of the paths to see where it leads, and halfway through the tunnel, the light inside explodes, causing the tunnel to get shrouded in darkness. All of a sudden, Holly begins screaming as she senses somebody touching her. The 2 boys try to calm her down and head toward the other pathway, and after a few minutes of walking, they find themselves at an old laboratory. Holly and Jensen leave JP at the entrance before entering the lab and looking around for answers. Jensen finds a book about the Philadelphia experiment, an experiment where the US was accused of teleporting a ship during World War II. Intrigued, Jensen and Holly continue their search, and they realize that they may be in more danger than they've ever anticipated. With top secret pictures of the Philadelphia mission to files of missing soldiers who were marked missing in action during the war, they decide to keep moving forward and find an exit so that all 3 of them can escape. Eventually, Jensen and Holly leave JP behind and find a cave that leads to another room. Beside it, they find a nuclear cell, which Holly claims must have been where one of the hikers who had radiation residue on him had been. They then find another room that Holly opens up, and they discover that it was being used as a torture chamber during the war. Inside, they find a camera that contained all the footage of their group had collected throughout their journey, and just then, they hear JP scream and they rush toward him. They find two monstrous creatures eating his flesh and killing him in the process, and as soon as the creatures spot them, they try to attack the two of them, but Holly and Jensen run for their lives and manage to make it to a room. Jensen theorizes that the creatures had opened up a wormhole and had teleported from their world, and he claims that if the two of them could visualize being somewhere else, they could also be teleported there. As they close their eyes, the scene changes to 1959. The two of them had teleported themselves outside the bunker, but had ended up in the year 1959. And it turns out that the two extra bodies that Alia had seen were actually Jensen and Holly, and the movie ends with the Russian military carrying Jensen and Holly's bodies inside the bunker and hanging their bodies. The monstrous creatures that killed JP were actually Holly and Jensen themselves.